This is Under the Crossed Swords, a podcast series from Mosquita Nautica.
That launch was murderous to work on. They were noisy, dangerous, and I hated it, actually. I forget the name of the engines now, but they were three converted airplane engines. And, of course, a very high-quality fuel, dangerous stuff. I don't know if David told you, because my brother was in the same mob as me, and maybe his dad told him. We had a shell case in the mess with the words, "The one that missed." Now, when you were towing a target, the launchers were capable of about 32 knots flat out. But towing a heavy target, it dragged them down, and you had a big winch at the back, at the stern, and the target would be some 3,000 yards behind you, and gradually you pulled it in to increase the speed of the target. I wasn't on board when it happened, but it actually whistled through the rigging of the Armentieres and cut one of the wires. A 9-inch shell, you know, I mean, it was, how the hell they did it, I don't know. But mainly she was used for shifting officers about, you know, as a fancy launch. And my brother was the coxswain of it when he ran it aground on a wreck and tore the rudders and props off. So
That was Mick Fricker, the brother of Biff Fricker, who was first mate of Armentieres and at the helm when this incident took place. Mick also served briefly on Armentieres and recalls the experience without much affection, as you can tell.
what happened was you might just be picked on to take it on a run. I only actually went on one firing practice. Ours was the Armentieres. I don't know if David still got it, but when our mess closed up, we sold off all the gear in it, and I managed to bid for the Armentieres plaque.
Armentieres was a 68-foot Thornycroft-built target towing launch, and this event almost saw an end to her service. The Armentieres Incident, the full version in the mate's own words. Accommodation was very good by the standards of those days, 1948. There was a central alleyway running longitudinally fore and aft from the forward mess. The senior officer's accommodation was located below the wheelhouse. Armentieres had been shipped to the Far East to be allocated as the personal launch of the General Officer commanding Far East Land Forces. When not on duty, she'd remain at her familiar berth alongside. For some months, Armentieres had been experiencing a plague of engineering problems, hence had been in the hands of J.I. Thornycroft's yard, Tanjong Ru. Bill Hatton had taken over as skipper, possibly from Pop Thai. Specially experienced Thornycroft staff had been flown out from the UK to attend her ongoing engine problems, which may have been exacerbated by the high humidity. Workshop work commenced. Eventually her mechanical condition improved, but subsequent trials were required. For the first sea trial run, the Brigadier and family were picked up and taken to one of the Dutch islands in the Malacca Straits. The Thornycroft engineer in charge of the trial pronounced that he was satisfied that the mechanical problems had been solved. Armentieres was taken back to Thornycroft's yard. She had been deemed as being in a satisfactory condition in which to take the General out. The vessel was prepared for sea, the crew having arrived from the RASC base at Pulau Brani. The General and his entourage arrived and came aboard at 8 a.m. sharp that particular Sunday morning. The destination of the voyage was actually uncertain at the time, as it was to be confirmed by the General on arrival. Mate discussed with skipper about the Tanjong-Ru departure plan, as it coincided with dead low water. Skipper was to take her out, as previously, personally on the wheel. On the previous voyage with the General's staff on board to try the vessel out, she had gone back through Keppel Harbour to the western anchorage and then out to the Malacca Strait. But on this Sunday morning, with the General embarked, she took the route from Tanjong-Ru out to the eastern anchorage, the old flying boat route. The mate had various duties to attend to on deck and then reported to the wheelhouse. Armentieres was well into the flying boat channel, but only at half ahead. This was because of the hazard of floating objects close inshore, and until fully on the plain, a lookout was kept forward for floating debris. When the mate returned to the wheelhouse, the master was on the wheel, with the General standing by the chart table. Salutations were exchanged, and the General pointed out on the chart table where he wanted to visit in the Dutch islands. The wheel was handed over to the mate, steady as she goes. By this stage, Armentieres was going across the eastern explosives anchorage. Her jackstaff had been steadied against a distant island as a steering reference mark. Promptly afterwards, an amazed lookout turned around to the wheelhouse as the high-speed target towing launch struck a submerged object. When the Japanese attacked Singapore in 1941, a Dutch liner had been sunk in this position. It was the superstructure of this liner, just submerged, which Armentieres had hit with her underwater gear. Immediately steering jammed and all engines stopped, the vessel gradually ceasing to make way through the water. As a result of the jolt of the impact, both master and General found themselves lying on the deck, covered in navigational charts, which had been ejected from the chart table. The mate received approval to go aft and inspect the damage. On looking over the stern, something gleaming was seen in the water. It was actually the central propeller shaft, and it was trailing about 12 feet astern of the hull. The starboard spade rudder had been bent upwards, piercing clean through the transom at the water level. Water was evidently entering the hull. To appraise the extent of the situation, the aft peak hatch to the steering gear compartment was lifted and the interior was inspected. Water was pouring rapidly into the compartment, and it was discovered that the port propeller had also been forced through the hull, and daylight could be seen entering there. The damage report was made to the master. All power had been lost, no functioning electrics survived whatsoever, hence no signalling equipment was able to be used. So immediately the international signal of a vessel in immediate distress was hoisted, November Charlie in code flags. Unfortunately, the Eastern Explosives anchorage was virtually deserted of shipping. Following discussions with the commanding officer, it was noted that a United States Naval Fleet oiler was moored at the edge of the anchorage. It was decided that the mate and 2 crew members were to take a dinghy to make contact with it. Armentieres also carried a pair of aircraft-type inflatable rubber dinghies, and these were got ready for her passengers, consisting of the General, his staff, some wives and children, approximately a dozen people in total. The mate went off to the US vessel. The situation was explained to the American officer on watch, the fact that they were the crew from the General Officer Commanding's launch, and that she was in immediate distress. The US captain came down and offered the use of their salvage pumps. The tanker lowered a motorboat to tow the stricken target tower over to the tanker so that the pumps could be operated. By this time it could be seen that Armentieres was already being towed bow first by a police launch, subsequently aided by a customs launch, to take her passengers off, and indeed they were promptly transferred onto one of these boats. Armentieres was finally moored alongside the tanker. The portable salvage pumps were rigged and the pumping operation started. The bulkheads held and the pumps managed to keep control of the flooding. The US captain offered to lift the stern out of the water in order to fit a collision mat. Armentieres' master declined this offer. Following discussions, a signal was flashed to the Singapore signal station requesting assistance from Pulau Brani. About 5 hours later, 2 LCTs, 1060 and 1111, duly arrived. Armentieres was lashed between them using the LCT's pumps to take over from the Americans. The US tanker was offered sincerest thanks for all their efforts. Armentieres was then towed back to Pulau Brani and unceremoniously beached in whale-like fashion, stern first, on the island. There she remained for some considerable time, certainly a matter of weeks. She was constantly sitting up and down on the tide, thereby causing further damage to the already extensively damaged stern. Despite the best efforts of 5 salvage pumps which had been brought down from the stores to help pump her out, eventually the flooding extended throughout the vessel. The damage was evaluated to come to £1,400, and finally she was towed back to Tanjong Rhu for substantial repairs. The resulting Board of Inquiry followed and was held in Singapore. The master claimed at the inquiry that the mate had been on the wheel for 20 minutes prior to grounding, but the mate was actually able to prove that barely 20 seconds had elapsed before the collision. It was upheld that the master had not made a proper plan for leaving harbour, even though the destination was not to be decided until underway. That was the full account in Biff's own words of the infamous Armentieres incident. It is important to note that despite the differing accounts put forward by Biff and Bill Hatton, that the two men had a continued and long-lasting friendship for the remainder of their lives, so there was clearly no enmity between them. Biff was adamant that whilst he was alive, the story was to remain within the family and friends only of those who had been involved. With it now consigned to history, we feel, together with Biff's son, that it's appropriate that this story see the light of day, especially as there is no shame to be had from such events. It is far from the only military vessel to have struck a submerged object, and indeed the cool-headed actions taken by the crew that saved all aboard, and indeed ultimately the vessel, were a credit to their professionalism and skill.
Every time I was to go aboard, I'd start effing and blinding, you know. I didn't want to go near it, but God, no. As I said before, I only did one tow job because shore artillery, coastal artillery, was quickly going out, you know. Yeah. And as I say, she became more or less and high officers runabout. Say we got a job, some general was coming, it would take at least 2 days. All the stanchions were brass, and they all had to be polished, you know, and there were tall ones keeping up the awnings. So you can imagine how much cleaning had to go on before the bloody general came on board.
Thanks for listening to this podcast episode from Mosquito Nautica. If you like the show and want to know more, check us out on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. Please leave us a review on whichever podcast app you use. We'll be regularly releasing content, so if you subscribe you'll get the updates and won't miss out. Thanks very much. Catch you next time.